Imagine waking up to a world where China is the only superpower. The United States has lost its dominance. The global balance of power has shifted forever. For decades, the world has been shaped by American influence, its military strength, cultural impact, and economic policies. But what if that all changed? What if China rose to become the sole global superpower? Would the world be more peaceful, or would new conflicts arise? Would China's dominance bring prosperity, or would it create a more controlled and restricted society? Today, we'll explore every angle of this mind-blowing scenario, how China could rise, what happens to the US and its allies, and how this shift would change our everyday lives. Stay with us as we break down the future of the world under China's rule. Understand a world where China is the sole superpower. We need to look at how it got here. This wasn't an overnight success. It was a carefully planned and executed rise, spanning decades. So, let's go back in time and examine the key moments that built China's unstoppable momentum. The journey from humble beginnings to a global power. China wasn't always an economic giant. In fact, just a few decades ago, it was struggling. Let's rewind to the late 20th century. In the 1970s, China was still recovering from the chaos of the Cultural Revolution. The country was largely agrarian, with a weak economy and limited global influence. But then came a turning point, Deng Xiaoping's economic reforms in 1978. This was the beginning of China's transformation into a capitalist powerhouse within a communist system. Deng opened up the country to foreign investments, established special economic zones, and pushed for rapid industrialization. Fast forward to the 1990s and early 2000s, China became the factory of the world. Western companies, including Apple, Nike, and General Motors, moved production to China due to its cheap labor and government incentives. The more the world relied on Chinese manufacturing, the stronger China became. Then, in 2001, a game-changing moment happened. China joined the World Trade Organization, WTO. This gave China access to global markets, allowing its exports to skyrocket. From that moment, China's economic growth became unstoppable. China's strategic moves, playing the long game. Unlike many nations that chase short-term gains, China plays the long game. Every decision is carefully calculated to strengthen its position in the future. The Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, 2013 to present. China's trillion-dollar project to build global trade routes connecting Asia, Africa, and Europe. By funding infrastructure projects worldwide, China not only expands its economic influence, but also gains political leverage over dozens of countries. Technology domination. Companies like Huawei, Tencent, and Alibaba have placed China at the forefront of AI, 5G, and e-commerce. The West depends on Chinese tech more than most people realize. Military expansion. The People's Liberation Army, PLA, has undergone a massive modernization, becoming the world's largest military force, both in numbers and advanced warfare capabilities. The decline of the US, paving the way for China's superpower status. While China was rising, the US was dealing with internal challenges that weakened its dominance. 2008 financial crisis. The global recession exposed weaknesses in the US economy. While America struggled, China continued growing. Endless wars. The US spent trillions on wars in the Middle East, draining resources that could have strengthened its economy and innovation. Political divisions. Increasing polarization and internal conflicts made the US appear weaker on the global stage, while China maintained stability. Debt dependence on China. The US borrowed heavily from China, further increasing Beijing's economic leverage. China's silent takeover. Global influence without war. Unlike past superpowers that relied on military conquest, China is winning through economic control and diplomacy. It doesn't need to invade countries when it can buy their loyalty through investments and partnerships. Africa. China has invested billions in African infrastructure, securing access to natural resources and gaining political influence. Latin America. Many countries in South America now rely on China for trade, pushing them away from U.S. influence. Europe and Asia. China's investments in critical infrastructure, like ports and energy projects, ensure that even Western allies rely on Beijing. The question now is, what happens when China no longer has to compete with any other superpower? How would the world change under China's sole rule? For China to become the only superpower, the US would have to fall. But how exactly would that happen? It wouldn't be just one event. It would be a series of crises, mistakes, and geopolitical shifts that weaken America beyond recovery. The perfect storm. America's collapse. The decline of a superpower doesn't happen overnight. It's a combination of economic instability, political division, and global pressure. Economic meltdown. If the U.S. faced another major financial crisis, bigger than 2008, it could trigger a recession so deep that recovery becomes impossible. Meanwhile, China, with its tightly controlled economy, would continue to rise. Internal civil unrest. Rising political and social tensions could push the U.S. into chaos. Protests, riots, and even internal conflicts could divide the country further, making it weaker on the world stage. The decline of the dollar. Right now, the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, giving America enormous power. But if China successfully pushes the world to use its own currency, the yuan, instead, the US economy could collapse. Loss of global influence. Countries that once relied on the US for military protection and economic partnerships could turn to China, leaving America isolated. The U.S. military weakens. America's military dominance has been a key factor in its superpower status, but what if that strength started to fade? Budget cuts and overstretching. Constant military spending on foreign conflicts could drain resources, leading to weaker defense capabilities. China's technological edge. China is heavily investing in AI-driven warfare, hypersonic missiles, and cyber capabilities. If it outpaces the US in military tech, the balance of power shifts. Allies losing faith. If Europe and Asia no longer see the US as a reliable power, they might align with China instead. Now that China has completely overtaken the US, what happens next? How does life change under China's rule? Stay tuned as we dive deeper into this. With no competition from the US, China's influence would shape the world in ways we've never seen before. Let's break down what daily life, global politics, and technology would look like under a China-led world order. Political landscape. A more authoritarian world. Surveillance everywhere. China's social credit system, which tracks citizens' behaviors, could expand globally. Countries influenced by China might adopt similar systems, leading to a world where privacy is nearly non-existent. Media censorship. Freedom of speech could decline worldwide as China's strict control over information spreads to other nations. Platforms like YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook could be replaced with Chinese alternatives. One-party rule as a global standard. With China as the dominant power, its political model might influence other countries, reducing democratic influence globally. Economic shifts. The yuan becomes the new global currency. The end of the dollar's dominance. If China forces global markets to adopt the yuan instead of the US dollar, it would reshape the financial system forever. New trade alliances. Countries would have to adapt to China's trade rules and policies, making economic independence difficult. Made in China. Everything. With the US out of the picture, nearly all industries could become dependent on China's production, supply chains, and technologies. Culture and daily life changes, entertainment shift. Hollywood's dominance would fade, and Chinese cinema, music, and digital platforms would take over global entertainment. Language influence. Mandarin might replace English as the global language of business and diplomacy. AI-driven control. China's advancements in AI and data tracking could lead to a world where algorithms decide everything, from where you work to what you can say online. So, is this future a utopia or a dystopia? Would China's dominance bring stability or new forms of control? If China became the world's only superpower, not everyone would accept it. There would likely be resistance, underground movements, and new power struggles. Global resistance. Who would fight back? The European Union, EU. The EU might try to counterbalance China's power by strengthening its own military and economic policies. But would it be strong enough without US support? India. As a rising power, India could become the new challenger to China, trying to lead an alternative global alliance. Underground tech movements. With heavy censorship, underground hackers and activists could form a digital rebellion using encrypted networks to resist Chinese control. Revolts within China. Not all Chinese citizens support the government. If people grew unhappy with absolute power, could internal protests or revolts threaten China's dominance? Unintended consequences. The risks of absolute power. Economic instability. A world completely reliant on China might backfire if China's economy crashes or mismanages resources. Military overstretch. Maintaining control over the entire world is not easy. History has shown that even the greatest empires collapse when they expand too much. Technological overreach. AI-controlled governance might lead to a loss of human freedoms, sparking unrest in even the most loyal nations. Would the world unite to fight back, or would China maintain control forever? The future. Will China stay on top forever? History has shown that no empire lasts forever. While China may dominate the world, the question remains, can it hold on to that power indefinitely? Economic cracks. If China's economy slows down, it could weaken its global influence. Technological shifts. New innovations might create unforeseen challenges to China's control. Rising competitors. A new power, perhaps India or a resurgent US, could challenge China's dominance. The future is never set in stone. Power is always shifting, and history has a way of surprising us. So, what do you think? Would a world under China's rule be better or worse? Let us know in the comments.